Going to be learning Likkutei Sichot, volume 2, Parshas Rei, page 80 in the Hebrew. בפרשת השבוע נידונות זאת הבהמה אשר תאכלו. First thing he's going to say is something that we've already seen. Very interesting. It's almost a repetition, word for word, of another Sichot that we saw. And let's see if you can guess where that Sichot was. Parshas Rei is in many ways a repetition of Parshas Shmini, without the first part. The second part, the end of Shmini, right. And the same is in Rei. Okay. So there's a lot of connection between them. So a lot of times things that you saw in it won't be here; it'll be in the first volume, but the same idea that we saw there. פרשת השבוע נידונות זאת הבהמה אשר תאכלו בהמות טהורות והבהמה אשר לא תאכלו בהמות טמאות. So Parsha includes a enumeration of the animals that we can eat and those that we can't eat. התורה קובעת שני סימנים לבהמה הנאכלת, מעלת גרה ומפרסת פרסה. The Torah gives two signs for an animal that may be eaten. It regurgitates its cud, and it has a split hoof. בסימני התורה קיימים שני סוגים. So like we saw there in Parshas Shmini, if I'm not mistaken it was there, then there are two types of simanim. There are two types of signs. Or
does the sign prove that it's kosher?
Right.
Or is it a necessity to have that sign before?
Or does it create the kosher? Right? Is it an indication, or is it what makes it?
Intrinsic factor of the kashrus.
Okay.
How about that for good?
Great. The first one is גורמים, סימנים שהם עצמם נימוק וסיבה לדבר. Okay. So there are those signs that cause the state that they signify. They are the cause itself, meaning that they, in our case, משום שהבהמה מעלת גרה ומפרסת פרסה, לפיכך היא בהמה התורה, because the animal regurgitates its cud, and because it has a split hoof, that is what makes it kosher. And the second, mavdilim, and he recalls them separating or differentiating. Like when we say, what's the differential diagnosis, right? What do you mean by a differential diagnosis? You mean that if it was this would be a sign, and if it was that disease, it would be this would be the sign. These would be the symptoms. So it's a differential. Mavdilim, the right word would be in English a differential. סימנים שלא הם הגורמים והסיבות לדבר. So the symptoms of a disease, or in this case, the symptoms of having a split hoof and regurgitating your cud, it does not cause anything, it's just a symptom. הם מבררים את הטהרה או היפוכה של הטהרה הקיימת בדבר מחמת עצמו. So they only indicate that this is the case here, that this animal is such and such. המציאות מתבררת באמצעות הסימנים. You differentiate reality based on these signs. So these are the two types of signs: intrinsic and differential. What?
According to the Gemara, an animal can still be kosher even if it doesn't have the symptoms.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Why? Because it was
other signs somewhere else, or there could be other ways of knowing. In other words, these particular signs are not what makes it kosher, what makes it kosher. You found a shechted animal, and its legs were chopped off.
no.
And you can open his jaw and do all sorts of things to find out whether it's kosher.
No, there's a lot of conditions there and things like that.
No,
It can be done, but I don't think it sheds any light on whether it's an intrinsic sign. Meaning, you're just saying, I don't know whether it has hooves, split hooves, but I can tell from other places, from other telltale signs, and these would not be intrinsic signs. But the fact that the animal had a split hoof, that's what made it kosher. That doesn't change that fact. It says, I don't know how to verify that it had it. But when it had it, that's what made it kosher. So then he would say, if it's kosher, then it also has a few other signs that these we can find. And those may not be intrinsic. By the way, this whole discussion, I don't remember, because there's three things, right? There's more than three things. There's also the jaws, and like you mentioned. And again, these are telltale. They're not. Nobody there thinks it's a real sign. It's just a way of figuring out since we know all the species of animals, we can figure out that this is that or the other one. It's an indirect sign. But regarding the third sign, which is the mafris balsa, shosei hashesa, that the split hoof is also cut. So that is, let's say like in a fish, it's better to see it, that it has scales and it has fins. So anything that has scales also has fins. Not everything that has fins has scales. So then it turns out that one of them is superfluous. So why did the Torah give both? The Gemara says, Yagdil Torah v'yadir. It's to show that the Torah, it's to have more Torah to learn, is a word. That's the idea. You're adding Torah. But you could also say maybe that the fins are only differential and the scales are intrinsic. There you could maybe make this distinction that even within the signs themselves, you have these two types. In any case,
there's another possibility.
Yeah.
There are some fish which have scales, which have fins, but when you take them out of the water, they have no scales.
But?
They have no scales when you take them out of the water.
No.
Like the tuna.
Like the what?
The tuna.
The tuna doesn't have scales when you take it out of the water?
No, they fall off as if you're putting it up. They fall off as it comes from a very low depth to a higher depth. The pressure makes them fall off. So there was a whole gigantic machlokes. Is the tuna kosher or no kosher? So they proved it by catching it in a net with very tiny holes and pulling it up out of the water, and then they found in the net all of the scales.
Why would it lose its scales when it comes up? I understand the pressure idea.
That's what it does.
And then what? It grows new ones?
No, when you're pulling it out of the water.
No, I understand, but it goes up because it wants to swim on top. It's not like you don't. You don't catch it because you don't have to go very deep to catch them. From what I know, they're on the surface.
Have a look at the history of Jewish
I will. Okay.
Very interesting.
Anyway, very interesting. פנימיות התורה, תורת החסידות כורכת משל בנמשל. So the inner teachings of Torah, Chassidus, connects and puts together the signifier with the signified. Because there's no words in English for mashal and nimshal. Simply no words. The best you can do is the metaphor, a parable, whatever, and what it signifies.
Yeah.
So another way of saying it. No, what it signifies. The nimshal is what it signifies. What is it trying to tell me? The moral of the story, the teaching.
Moral of the story.
The teaching, whatever. But moral is wrong because there's no moral here. It could just be that it's a parable for something else. It's a very interesting thing. Back a long time ago when I was still interested in these things, I'm still interested, but I haven't been able to solve it, so I gave up. I looked for a way to say the simple idea that exists in Hebrew and exists in Greek even, but there's no equivalent in English. You can't say mashal and nimshal. Certainly there's no two words that are connected to one another. So what the closest I can come up with is the signifier and the signified. The signifier is the parable, the metaphor, the simile, whatever it is, and what it signifies is the signified.
Why couldn't you say the point of the story?
Because it's not a word. The point of the story assumes the person will now understand that what you mean is the thing that was enclosed within the story. And
what the story teaches us.
And it's too long. Anyway, so that's the closest I ever came to it. What does it mean to put it together in this case? למרות שהמשל הוא דבר זר ואינו משמש אלא משל בלבד, כרוך הוא בנמשל, לפי שאין בעולם דבר מקרי גרידא. So even though now when we look at parables, the parable is on the face of it something foreign. It's not related to what it signifies. Right? But it's connected to it. Meaning it's enveloping it in some way. So even though it may be something entirely different, but it's still holding the signified inside of it. And there's nothing in the world that's by chance. The So really, in the depth of it, especially when we're talking about something in the Torah, something that's used as a signifier, that's used as a parable, is connected intrinsically to the signified, to the meaning of the story, the meaning of the parable. Mishum shanimshal noveh min animshal, because really, and this is where another play on words in Hebrew comes out, and you can't get that in English at all, that they're connected to one another because one creates the other. Another way of saying this is that hamashal noveh min animshal, the parable was created by the signified.
So it caused it.
Yeah, caused it. So when you're saying, for instance, a cheetah, he runs as fast as a cheetah, which is a simile or a metaphor. So why would you say that speed created the cheetah's speed? Why would you say? You wouldn't say that. That's a very strange thing to say. Say there's something called speed, moving quickly in the world. Then there's an animal called a cheetah, and it happens to run fast. He says, no, if this is a parable that the Torah is using, then this indicates that what the parable is signifying was created by the signified. What the parable itself was created. It's a descent of the signified. In other words, there's this whole concept of ishtalshalus, which means that things come down in levels, in gradation. So it was more abstract above, and it became more physical below. So the metaphor is not accidentally connected to what it signifies. It was actually an outgrowth of what it signified. Okay? שמשתלשל לעולם נחות יותר נהפך למשל. The lower it descends, the more it becomes parabolic. More like a parable. And
parabolic is different.
Not the same thing.
The shape of the lens.
Yeah. We have to think about it. לפי זה יש לשני סוגי הסימנים קשר לדבר עצמו. So in this case, the two signs have an intrinsic connection to the thing itself. In other words, אף הסימנים שאינם מהווים גורם וסיבה לדבר, כי הם סימנים לבירור מציאות, even signs that are only differential, they're not intrinsic to what they describe, to what they reveal. קשורים בדבר עצמו, they're still connected to the essence of the thing itself that they're talking about, that they're revealing. לא במקרה משמש פרט זה כסימן הדבר, אלא שהדבר עצמו כשהוא משתלשל לדרגה נחותה יותר הופך הוא לסימן. So here he's saying something new, that we have to understand these simanim, these signs of kosher animals, as parables, as metaphors. It's a very big chiddush. It's a metaphor for kashrus. The fact that you have a split hoof is a metaphor for something being kosher. The fact that you chew your cud, it's a metaphor for being kosher.
Okay, well, let's come along and explain what are some of the deeper meanings of chewing the cud.
Fine, that's exactly what it's going to do now. It's going to ungarb, take off the external vestments of the parable, and reveal why this is what it means that something is kosher.
Simply, much simpler English, you just say, what is the significance, the intrinsic significance of the fact that it's going to...
If that works for you. מובן איפה ששני הסימנים מעלת גרה ומפרסי פרסה על כל סוג של סימנים שהם שייכים אליו, יש להם קשר הדוק עם זאת הבהמה אשר תאכלו. So the Rebbe says, it doesn't really matter in this case, or in any case, whether it's an intrinsic sign or it's just a differential sign. In any case, it's connected essentially, intrinsically, to the concept of something that is kosher and we're allowed to eat. Let's see how. So this whole part, well, not the whole part, but the beginning, that there's two types of signs, this we saw in Shmini. But now we added this idea that this is also, the signs are parables for the intrinsic quality of being kosher. עניין האכילה, so section 2, עניין האכילה, זאת הבהמה אשר תאכלו, הוא שהאדם נוטל חי צומח ודומם, ואוכלו אותו הופך הוא דם ובשר כבשרו. What does it mean to eat? We've talked about this in the past. To eat means to integrate something, to make it part of you. In this case, it's like to elevate it. So you're taking something that was alive, or grew, or was inanimate, and by eating it, you make it into part of yourself. So the inanimate, the vegetable, or the animal becomes part of the speaker, part of man. And this is the very essential purpose of creation, that everything should be elevated into a speaker. What?
But a guy also, when he eats something, becomes part of his body.
Yeah.
He's not elevating it.
Why not? He's elevating it to the status of man. The question is, what is he going to do with it? That's the question.
But is a guy called the המדבר?
Oh, essentially yes. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but in principle yes. Because really מדבר, to speak really means that the Shekhinah is talking out of your throat. That's really what it means to speak. That the Shekhinah is present. That you could argue that it's not by everyone. Maybe the Shekhinah is not talking out of everybody's throat. Maybe when if I'm fighting with my wife, God forbid, hasn't happened, but it happens once in a while. So, the Shekhinah is talking out of my mouth? Probably not. Probably suffering, not talking. Okay. באדם עצמו כלולים פרטים שבהם הוא דומה לדומם, צומח וחי, דוגמת הנאמר בגמרא, בשלושה נדמה כבהמה. וכלולים בו פרטים שבהם הוא שונה מן הדומם צומח חי, בהם הוא אדם, מן המדבר. There are things in a man that make him similar to the inanimate, to the vegetable, and to the animal. And this is similar to what the Gemara says, in three things man is like an animal. And he also has details in him that make him different from animals and from vegetables and from the inanimate. And then he's a species unto himself, mina medaber. So here you see very interestingly that, what do we call these? What do we call domem tzomeach chai medaber? For what? No, we call them arbat aminim. We call them four species. So you see that it's not common, but that's what it's called in. Like the Rebbe says here, it's mina medaber. It's a species of man, of the speaker. And this is also very interesting because in the Torah, man is never called a species. He's never. The word species is used only by vegetables, and that's in the beginning of the Torah already, and by animals, like in our parsha. In the Torah, man is never referred to as a species, but by the sages he is. And so when we say mina medaber, the species, I'm not sure if it's in the sages or it's later on. In any case, but there is this concept of species related to man. כשם שלגבי דומם צומח חי מדבר באופן כללי, הרי התכלית אינה בדומם צומח חי כי אם המדבר, וגם המעלה שבדומם צומח חי הוא דווקא כאשר נכללים במדבר, כך לגבי המדבר עצמו. לא בפרטים בהם הוא דומה לדומם צומח חי תכליתו ויתרונו, תכליתו בחלק המדבר שבו. In the same way that the animals, the vegetables, and the inanimate should be elevated to the level of a speaker, to the level of a man, so too within man himself, all the other details should be elevated to man's intrinsic ability to speak. So we also have other qualities. We eat, we drink, we sleep, we do other things. All these things need to be elevated within ourselves to this very particular and unique quality of man, which is that he speaks. תכלית שאר פרטיו, דומם צומח חי שבו, שיהיו גם הם בהתאם למדבר שבו ויכללו בו. So the goal is to elevate everything. Also the parts of me that are like the vegetable, the parts of me that are like the inanimate, the parts of me that are like the animal, to elevate them within myself to the level of speaker. הוא הדבר לגבי הדומם צומח חי הכללי, and same thing is by the rest of the world. the animals, the vegetables, and the inanimate in the rest of the world. שאדם משתמש בהם והם נכללים בו, תכליתם להיכלל במדבר שבאדם דווקא, מתוך כך שאדם ינצלם בהתאם לעניין וחשיבות האדם. That is man's purpose, to elevate everything to his level. And so when somebody says, I don't want to eat animals, so you just prevented the animal from reaching its purpose in life. Maybe it doesn't mean that you have to eat chicken a day. Okay? You can take a little break. You can eat once a week. That's what the Arizal said. That somebody who's not a great Talmid Chacham should be eating meat only once a week on Shabbos. Don't eat it the rest of the week. It's also not so healthy. You don't need it more than once a week. But you can't not eat it at all. If you have a problem, you have a problem. The doctor tells you can't eat this, don't eat it. But in principle, you should be eating it. Why? Because that's its only way to elevate. And what we mean by elevate is not that specific cow or that specific chicken. It's the species itself. If mankind would stop, it would mean that there is an end to this elevation that's been going on for almost 6,000 years.
It did stop when the base of English.
What?
The elevation did stop to a certain extent.
No, but we continue to eat. We continue to eat.
But it doesn't have the same elevation as being.
That's different. We're talking here about elevation to the level of a speaker. We're not talking about elevation to God. That's something entirely different. Okay. Do we have time for one more? What time is it? I think we need to end. Okay, so we'll continue tomorrow with three, with the next page.
You ever from the story of Ichimai again? Ichimai Miguel, you know the story?
I know many stories about it. What's the story?
He had a minhag, he didn't eat. Every Ichimai would not eat anything that had a shaila on it. Anything there was a shaila, even if a raw pascha that it was kosher, he wouldn't touch it. So everybody who worked in the kitchen knew that if there was a shaila, you just gave it to the poor people.
See if he eats.
Right?
Just don't bother.
Wouldn't eat it. So there happened to be one day a new maid in the kitchen, and everybody was out, and she opened the chicken, and she saw there's a shaila, so she doesn't know from better or from worse, so she takes it to the Rav. And the Rav packs it and it's kosher. Okay, so she brings it back, she cooked it, and she put it on his plate, and he took one look at it and he refused to eat it. So why? Because it says, Asher ta'achalu, that which may be eaten. So he had taken upon himself, trained his body, that he could never ever eat something which was not, because that which is allowed, he allowed it, he told his body what it's allowed to eat. So he didn't eat it. Intrinsic understanding.